A 1-year review of doing sauna. I go through these points: history and then Garmin load. So, history. I heard about sauna. On the one side, I heard about sauna from Andrew Huberman and many others. On the other side, I wanted to try sauna. Then I moved to another city and I searched for a gym which also had a sauna conveniently, which also was kind of located to a home, which I eventually moved in. Now, I wanted to try sauna. I first of all needed to finish something else, but then I eventually dove into trying sauna, which is now about 14 months ago. Now, I began initially so Andrew Huberman offers a couple of different protocols which all seem to then work fine. He has a few different options. So you could either do one big session or you could do multiple smaller sessions. I think he has 2 or 3. So in the beginning, I had the idea to, after every strength training session, do 10 minutes of sauna. I wanted it specifically to be a very low threshold because I just wanted to try it, and I knew that if I already said, okay, I do 20 minutes of sauna after every strength training, which in my case would be 3 times a week, then this would become too much time investment and eventually I would cut it because it is then just too much. So I said, okay, I do 10 minutes. But also me being me, I then eventually tried to push myself and push myself and push myself. I also found after 10 minutes, it did basically not much of anything. So the sauna I have access to is a 90 degrees Celsius sauna. What I also have to mention is that after every time I shower cold. There are a few minor exceptions, but within the last 5 years I showered hot maybe 2 times. So I cannot shower hot just for the sake of going to sauna, so what I do is I shower cold before, which already buffers quite a little bit of the heat. It also means that I am still a little bit dry when I go into the sauna, so now compared to somebody who might come off of training and just showers hot, I already have a buffered cold in me, which kind of buffers the heat, one could say. So therefore I already have a little bit of more duration, but it also takes longer time. So this is kind of actually a contrary effect to what I would intend, because what I would intend is that sauna actually does something. Now, there are many different supposed benefits of sauna. I can not really test these, and this is also not at the point where I would discuss them. Now, I want to discuss what I actually can measure. What can I measure is mostly what I can measure on my watch, and this is then the second point of this. But first of all, let's stick to the history. So I initially started out with 3 times 10 minutes, which would be a very minimal protocol of basically 30 minutes in a week. Now this did not do much of anything, but I got kind of into the habit and I got into the experience, and I just wanted to basically accumulate data such that I could then judge further whether this was something worth investing my time into. Now, because of maybe changing a few different things, I changed to switching to morning workouts mostly. This is kind of the biggest change. This was kind of the biggest change. I then did not have the opportunity to go into sauna afterwards because in the morning the sauna is not yet on, which meant that I decided to cut sauna and prioritize the morning workouts. Which also meant that if I now wanted to do sauna, I needed to be at the gym in the evening. And I needed to be at the gym in the evening at a second time. Initially, I thought I could not visit the gym multiple times, that there was like a constraint that I could only visit the gym once with the membership I had. But it turned out that I just believed this, and it actually wasn't true at all. I just had this one instance where I wanted to get back in because I forgot something and the band didn't work, and so I assumed, well, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I could not figure out how to do sauna in the evening with training in the morning, because in the morning the sauna did not have opened yet. Then I eventually figured out that I could also visit twice. But now, even though I live somewhat close to the gym, it's a couple of 100 meters, close to a kilometer, there are also lights in between, so it takes a little bit of time to get there. Therefore, going to the gym twice a day, at least on the days in which I would go to sauna, was not really something that was very useful. It would only make sense if I, on the way to somewhere else, in the morning got to the gym, and then on the way back home, I again would arrive at the gym, which sometimes actually worked, so I sometimes then did sauna. So I nonetheless decided to continue sauna. So what I did is on a Sunday, so my schedule is currently that I do 3 times strength training, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Then I do on Sunday a run. On Tuesday, a interval training. On Wednesday, not on Wednesday, but on Thursday, I either do swimming or assault bike, which is basically my longer cardio day. And then on Saturday, I do an additional circuit workout or a bodyweight workout or something like this. So I usually try to do the workouts in the morning. And if I do the workouts still in the morning, then there is the problem that I need to go to the gym a second time. And if I go to the gym a second time, I also feel bad to destroy my good association, my work association with the gym, if I just go there and then shower and go to the sauna and then leave again. And I just don't want to. So I try to build a very strong association with the gym. If I go to the gym, as soon as I basically get out of the changing rooms, that I just work, and then I stop working and I go back and then I leave. And if I intermix this with, okay, I just do a little bit of sauna here and a little bit of sitting in between there somewhere else, and then I talk a little bit, then this does not really work for me. I need to have the switch, which is kind of either working or basically just having time and being able to spend time without having to watch the time. And the gym would kind of be also the place where other people. This is just a very difficult thing, at least for me. Now, what I decided to try to do is to do on Sunday, because I was not in the gym on Sunday also, I ran in the morning, and then in the evening I would run additionally or bike to the gym and do 20 minutes, not 20 minutes, but 20 minutes actually was the minimum threshold I eventually got into. So first of all, maybe back to the 3 times a week. As I did still the 3 times a week, I eventually tried out more and more and longer because it did nothing for me, and I still wanted to test it. Was there something to sauna? So what I did is I extended as long as I could, and I eventually arrived at 25, then 30, then 40, and then 45 minutes, which was the maximum duration I ever did. Then I switched to once a week. I said, okay, this showering here and showering afterwards and then changing again. What if I accumulate it all into one session? Now, Andrew Huberman also has this one protocol where you can do actually one session, but he then does like sauna, and then he gets out, and then he does sauna again, and then he gets out into a cold plunge, but I don't have access to a cold plunge. And so I would need to... It did not make sense for me. I actually tried for a little bit 2 sauna sessions, so basically 1 sauna session with at least 20 minutes and then plus a secondary one, which would also be 20 minutes. And so I tried to hit at least 40 minutes in total for a little bit of time, but then both were not that useful. Now, because I have been tracking the workouts also with Garmin, and specifically more with Garmin Load, I also saw that the 3 times 10 minutes did basically almost nothing. If I then had a 45-minute sauna session, then in terms of Garmin Load, this would be maybe a 30 or a 40, for example. Whereas, so maybe for reference, for those who don't have a Garmin watch, if I have the assault bike session on a Thursday, and I do maybe 40-50 minutes of very intense, maybe some 3, it's not that intense, but if I have a very good workout, which might be averaging zone 4, for example, then I might have a Garmin workout load of 110, for example. A very good sprint workout might also be in the range of maybe 50 to 120 or something like this. Then a normal gym training session is often not that high in Garmin Load. So Garmin Load is basically a metric that tries to see how much this impacted you in kind of one number in terms of cardiovascular effort. Not cardiovascular effort, but how much cardiovascular work you did, kind of. And so I try to also see whether sauna did something like this. So I then had these 2 sessions, and these 2 sessions also were kind of in the way of me I try to be as efficient in many areas as possible, and so to save time and then to use the time in order to do something else, which everybody does anyway, all the time. But nonetheless, I am trying to do something like this, and I eventually realized that 20 minutes in the sauna also did not do much of anything. Of course, it sometimes was harder, it sometimes was less hard. When was it harder? When was it less hard? If I ate a lot, it was harder. If I ate less, it was easier. At least up to the point where I was sitting in the sauna and becoming hungry. But since the sauna is kind of a very... It's similar to if you sprint. Afterwards, you don't feel like eating. And the same is true for also my HIIT workout on Tuesday. It usually takes a little bit of time afterwards until the hunger reappears. It could be anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 hours, even if you were hungry before. Mostly because what I assume is that the stress is just, basically the body is still dealing with the stress, and so it cannot take in food yet. And so this is also a problem in terms of eating. Now, if I do on a Sunday evening and I want to go to, if I do sauna on a Sunday evening and I want to go to bed somewhat early, then if I do the sauna session and then it takes 2 hours for the hunger to reappear, but then it appears actually, and then I become hungry, and then I need to fast maybe at least 2 hours before going to bed, and actually it seems to be better the longer I fast before bed without at least getting hungry. And then if hunger returns, but is very, very subtle, then this is kind of, and also the body temperature cools down, subjectively feeling, but also the skin temperature, which is measured on the Garmin Fenix 7S Pro, at least the wrist temperature here. There is also a feature which estimates the core temperature, which is available as a Garmin glance in the Garmin IQ store. If you're familiar with this, and then you can download and you then can actually see, at least if you are in activity, what the core temperature estimate would be. So you can have this in an activity, which I, for example, here did, and then you can see that my core temperature approximately is 37.17. Which is also quite convenient. There are also sensors for measuring core temperature, which athletes like Christian Blumenfeld actually use or are using in training. And but I kind of am of the approach that I don't want to have any more trackers on me, so I already have this and this. And I think everything else, also a chest strap, just would increase the threshold for doing an activity, because then I have to remember this. And then if I break the chain of recording data and so on and so forth, another idea. So back to the sauna. So I eventually decided, what if I did it all in one day? And this is something I already mentioned. So then instead of doing twice a week, this was I think Sunday and something else, what if I try to hit 40 minutes, all of the 40 minutes that I previously targeted in one session, and not in two, because if I do 2 sessions, then the whole thing takes like 90 minutes, and I just don't want to use 90 minutes for this. There is always this other thing, which is just working out more. If I do 90 minutes of sauna, then I could easily do an additional assault bike workout for 50 minutes, and then sit maybe in the sauna. So the opportunity cost, the main opportunity cost of doing something that is partially creating cardiovascular load is just to do something that is actually activity. And so why would you then still use sauna? I think of sauna now as a tool that allows me to not use any of my limbs and not further strain my tendons and ligaments and also muscles, but still additionally increase my Garmin load. So Garmin load is usually measured as in the last 4 weeks. And so what I've seen multiple times now, and also because I have been somewhat off sauna and I tried not having sauna in my life and see what the impact of it would be. If I don't do sauna additionally, then this additional load, let it be only like 10, 20, 30 or 40 points of Garmin load, is missing. And so it's missing in the weekly load. It's also missing in the 4-week load. I actually might have to look up what it is. So the load is the 7-day average. So if I do one sauna session, and this one sauna session repeatedly gives me at least 10 points, then I am consistently 10 points above what I otherwise would produce in terms of my workouts. And so also to think of this in terms of the weekly cardiovascular load. If my cardiovascular system is 10 points more, let's just say it's 10 points, strained, then this also applies for the rest of the week. So every additional workout is basically on a higher level because my cardiovascular system is already a little bit stressed. So basically everything I add on top, which is kind of just a thing that is not on top, but actually on the bottom, is then a little bit more intense for me because I have this additional thing in my life, which also causes at least cardiovascular stress. Without this, I am still doing my normal activity, but what I am not doing, so basically I'm more rested in my normal activity, which strains then the heart less. What I also observed after kind of leaving out sauna, but also after kind of reducing my cardiovascular load for multiple other reasons, is that my HRV then got higher and higher. Mostly, I think that would be the easiest explanation, that I became more and more rested. But this also meant that my cardio score in terms of Garmin got down and down and down. So the highest Garmin cardio score I ever had was like 7.4K, and now it is currently 6.3K, which is basically 1,000 points less, which, if this is a number that makes sense, would mean quite a loss, a seventh basically of the points I had before. But there are multiple other reasons which factor into this as well. Now back to the sauna and back to this one day. So I decided to try to attempt 40 minutes. 40 minutes every single Sunday. And 40 minutes at 90 degrees is quite something. Also, it is quite something for me. What the heart rate then would usually look like, and there are multiple other effects for being 40 minutes in the sauna, which I might explain or at least describe. So, what usually the heart rate zones, or not the heart rate zones, but just the heart rate in the sauna looks like is this. And this is a curve that you don't get in any other activity. Even with a salt bike, for example, that is quite constrained, and so it is kind of measurable, even though the assault bike does not connect to my Garmin watch, or I cannot get the data out of there, which is quite sad. But that basically there's an accumulative effect. The longer you are in, the better it is, because the more cardiovascular load you get, up until the point where you crash, which also sometimes happens. I had a couple of instances where I just barely walked out of the sauna, mostly also because I tried to push it to 40 minutes to 45 minutes, and there are multiple variables that now play into this. Because I now try to do one sauna session in a week, what I then eventually landed on is that I just fasted all day. Why did I fast all day? Because I knew that if I didn't fast, that after 20 minutes I would already begin to kind of tap out, even though, of course, I cannot really tap out in the sauna, I just can go out. But if I didn't do this, if I was able to fast all day, then what I effectively had was maybe 15 additional minutes of duration. Now, one could again argue that's kind of a sideline optimization. It's kind of bypassing the effect I actually want to achieve, because I'm also showering cold before. What I also often did in winter especially is that if I drove somewhere with the bike, so to the gym with the bike, that I just wear my normal indoor clothes basically and do a little bit of cold exposure before, or I might run with my summer clothes to the gym just to already reduce my temperature and to then allow for a buffer, which then would allow me to hit higher numbers in terms of duration. Now, one could of course say this is a sideline optimization, but also these are the metrics I track, and so I try to optimize them within the system I am given. And so I then had 40 minutes a couple of times, but I just overall kind of began to tap out, I would say. It was just too hard. It was really just too hard for me to do. Fasting all day. In addition, I would also want to optimize for the run in the morning. And so I ran in the morning. In addition, I ran in the morning and I also do cold exposure after the run, which in winter is going into the river, but it's also in summer going into the river. It's just in winter it is sometimes 0 degrees or 4 degrees or 7 degrees Celsius, and that's quite cold. If I additionally then am already kind of in this state where I'm already fasted and I'm all day long, sometimes in a very alert state, and sometimes in a state where I already begin to become hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. And if I become hungry all day, but my body has a fixed nutrient need for a given day, or just on average, let's just say, then eventually this nutrient need comes back in the form of hunger. So if I then additionally do a sauna, and then I have 1, 2, or maybe 3 hours, which it takes for the hunger to reoccur after I went to the sauna, then I'm beginning to eat at Sunday evening at 10 a.m., not 10 a.m., but 10 p.m. in the evening, and then I need to make up all the calories. So I eat all the calories, and then this would often lead to me then not being able to sleep for multiple hours, which again is kind of a sideline optimization, because if I don't get proper sleep, then what am I doing in terms of activity? So I eventually realized that this was kind of becoming a problem. Now, it also had the large benefit that in these periods, these were kind of the periods in which I also increased my VO2 max, I think, the furthest. So I had, when I got the first Garmin watch was a 6S Pro, now 1.5 years ago, in basically the beginning of 2023. I then switched to a 7S Pro in the beginning of 2024. So on my first watch, I don't know what I wanted to say with this. Yeah, but what I wanted to target at is that I initially had a Garmin load, and I took a look at Garmin load, and it was like 400, 600, 700. And then when I began to basically, I was talking about VO2 max. So with the Garmin watch, initially I had a VO2 max of 52 or 53 as measured on the Garmin 6S Pro. I also actually recently looked back at older estimates from Samsung, and Samsung in the beginning of 2019 or in mid 2019 or 2020 gave me a VO2 max estimate of 52. And then it went down, it went to 42. Of course it went up and down a little bit. And then shortly before I got the watch, the Garmin watch, it had a 52 on the Galaxy Watch, which is not that high. Now, I was able to increase it to 57 as of recently. I actually had for a couple of days 58 until I kind of ran not fast enough, and so it decreased again to 57. So I had basically an increase of a couple of percentage points within a year, anywhere from maybe 4 to 10% depending on where one counts and where one begins to count, and so on and so forth. So it depends obviously on the time window, and also on mostly on the time window. Now I did increase my VO2 max quite a little bit as of exactly 1 year ago. Actually, it was beginning to, so 1 year ago it was already at 54, then it switched to 55, 56 and 57 within the time span of maybe 4 months of something like this. And then basically beginning 2024 up until now, and now it's September, it didn't change at all, mostly. So most of these changes occurred now, not within the last half year, but in the half year before. And within this time, I also did quite a lot of, first of all, baseline activity also. So I also have a slight difference in, of course, it's also hard to standardize activity otherwise from workout. You just sometimes do these things and sometimes you do these things, and often there are things you cannot control. What I'm trying to say here is that I think there is an alignment of the period in which I did quite intense sauna, where I pushed myself as hard as I possibly could in the sauna, but also in my sprint workouts, where I just couldn't see how I could do this next workout. I just couldn't see how I this evening would sit in the sauna and basically being barely able to walk out. Now, of course, I'm kind of dramatizing, but I'm also not really. I try to accurately depict what my mind looked like. And what my mind looked like is that I feared these sessions. I feared the session of mostly the sprint workout on Tuesday, but also the sauna. These were like these two really giant things, mentally speaking, and I was basically on the limit of my capacity. And I sometimes afterwards stood in the shower and I was barely holding it together, and all for the sake of trying to increase my VO2 max, all for the sake of, well, trying to improve my fitness now, because if I now don't, then eventually it will decline anyway. And basically, if it declines, so if we take this curve and we just invert it, and not like this, it would have been a cool trick, but it's kind of the wrong direction and I cannot mirror it. So my VO2 max will decline, and my cardiovascular fitness also will decline. If not in the next couple of years, the ultimate longevity drug is discovered. So if I am not able to push it further higher up now, and it's only kind of 57, which it puts me in the 5%, at least according to Garmin, of my age group, but I also have been running since I was 12, and so I would like to go even higher. And Brian Johnson is higher, at least as measured, for example, and he is, I don't know, 46, 47 years old, and I am not 46 and 47 years old. So he has also properly measured, and not just an estimated VO2 max that is already higher than mine. I also assume Peter Attia, for example, has a VO2 max that might be higher than mine, even though, so I once calculated, because he mentioned that he has what he has in terms of the interpretation, and I just calculated it once, but I don't know. Back to the sauna. I eventually decided, well, to mostly quit these sessions, not at least trying to do the 40 minutes. I also had this, so the initial rule I set up was if I did 2 sessions, then I should hit at least 45 minutes, or I could have the option to do 1 session in 40 minutes. So in order to basically replace the less stress of 2 sessions, I could also, so I basically had more time than if I did. But effectively, if I did 1 session, of course, this gave me a much better bang for the buck, so to speak, because it just compounds. And if I then, in between, so I sometimes also did sessions where I did 20 minutes, then I got out and I did an additional 20 minutes. Or I did 30 minutes, I got out and I did an additional 20 minutes. But then the second session is like, you are sitting there, and because I showered cold in between, I don't wait. I just shower cold 5 times, which takes maybe 2 minutes at max, and then I go back in. But nonetheless, so it's in total, if I am sitting in the sauna for 50 minutes, then it's actually, the total duration is then just 52 minutes. But of course I need to go to the gym, and I need to change, and so on and so forth. So I decided to eventually cut this. This was before, and then only do 1 session, and then I eventually cut it back and I just said, okay, let's just do 20 minutes of sauna. And this is what I have been running on for the now last couple of months. And then I was like, okay, if I do have to additionally get there on Sunday evening, what if I just don't? What if I just save these 60, 70 minutes and I just do something else that is actually more useful? And what I also did is I tried evening workouts in addition to my morning workouts. Now, because I mostly was consistent with the morning workouts, and the morning workouts also worked quite fine, I would say, they also would allow me to eat already earlier in the day, which also had the big downside that I was not as effective and productive during the day because I worked out, and then there is the need for nutrients afterwards, and the need for nutrients draws with it by the side effects of ingesting food, which is that you have less blood in your overall body and so on and so forth. So in terms of alertness, not exactly optimal. I actually did quite a little bit of time where I tried to fast as long as I possibly could in the beginning from waking up, and then eventually eat. And the eating was always like, okay, I lost again. I lost the war against my body because I tried to lose body fat, and I also tried to, work as long as I possibly could without eating, because this would drive alertness higher and higher, but not necessarily only the alertness one wants, but also into kind of the anxious side, where it's almost like an overdrive. It's not exactly alert and calm, it's more alert and overdrive, one could say. One could also say worried instead of anxious. Now, in the last couple of weeks and months, I then decided, okay, what if I just don't go to the sauna? Then I eventually found back, and I also kind of missed these other parts. Now, what are these other parts? These other parts are that it's a little bit of a socializing thing. You can kind of do a workout together, at least you have a little bit of cardiovascular load, but you can also talk to people. And nobody has anything to do in a sauna. There is nobody who now needs to get out. Of course, there is eventually somebody who needs to get out. Everybody needs to get out at some point in time. But the system is set up in a way that the longer you sit in a sauna, the more heated that you are. And that kind of, one could argue, is what sauna is kind of optimizing, or what the sauna goer is optimizing for. Now, if two people run, then it's the two people are optimizing for, okay, I'm running faster than you. But in the sauna, it's like, okay, I can sit here longer than you. So the system is set up in a way such that it is more beneficial for everybody if they just sit longer in the sauna. To a certain extent, one could say. And also the benefit of the sauna is basically extending duration, because heat is fixed. And everything else is also fixed. And how much you have eaten before is also, at least for the point of now being in the sauna, also fixed. Now, I kind of missed this social side to the sauna also. And similarly to napping during the day, or also sleeping during the night, but especially napping during the day. It is just a time where you don't do anything, but you're still alert. Not alert, but awake. And this, I think, seems to be quite useful. Andrew Huberman also recently began to talk more and more about this, also in relation to Rick Rubin, who seems to mention this often, that the body is still and the mind is awake, or the mind is alert in some... I think these are kind of the words. So, if I'm awake, but I'm kind of constrained in space, and I cannot really get out because of the system I set up, where it doesn't make sense now to get out because I'm sitting in a sauna and I'm trying to extend the duration here, then I cannot really do anything but think. And as in addition, you have this external stressor, which just becomes more and more unbearable. And this is also where I can compare myself against the version of myself that was here last week. And I can effectively say that the version of myself that lasts longer in the sauna is a better version of myself, at least in terms of cardiovascularly, at least cardiovascularly speaking. But of course, one also could consider the rest of the week, how hard did I work out during the rest of the week, and so on and so forth. Of course, it's not really comparable, but at least for the sake of, okay, last week I did 20 minutes, now I can do 45 minutes. Well, I also fasted all day long, but at least I optimized for the thing I can optimize for. That seems to be kind of the target in a sauna. And so I have a comparison metric. I also try to standardize these other workouts, such as, so in air biking or assault biking, for example, I try to hit 500 calories on the bike, and I just try to minimize the time. So the target function is time minimization. In terms of the strength training, there are kind of two competing target functions. So the first one is to complete the workout in the given time. So I usually work with fixed times, but recently I also began tracking during the workout in order to have correcter data, or more correct data. And so I have been lessening or loosening the fixed time constraint. So I usually try to finish the workout after 40 minutes. With the runs, I make exceptions, and with the assault bikes, assault bike 500 calories, I also had to make exceptions because I just cannot hit the 43 minutes of record time on the assault bike for 500 calories any longer. Now it's taking me 65 minutes. And this is also something that's fairly evident. I can compare my cardiovascular system, okay, on this date, and this is recorded on my Garmin watch. Of course, now I don't have the assault bike data, mostly because it doesn't connect, which is sad. Then I can say, okay, here I have this one data point, and here, this was yesterday, and yesterday, or actually 2 days before, I did 59 minutes for the same 500 calories. The assault bike is standing there, it's always the same. And the same is, to a certain extent, true for the sauna. The sauna is always kind of the same heat, at least ideally. Practically speaking, there is an oven in there, and the oven heats, and then it gets hotter and hotter, and then it cools down again. Now, similarly to how with big numbers, in terms of statistics, everything basically goes to the supposed likelihoods, for example. If you just throw a dice billions of times, then the probabilities are kind of evenly spread with the different numbers on the dice, so with the different 6 sides. But if you just have a couple of times, then similarly to the sauna also, you sample basically different stages of the sauna. Sometimes basically you might have 2 stages in which it's hot, then it's a little bit cold, and then it's hotter again. And sometimes you might basically, if it is a sinus wave, you might cut out different stages, which makes it harder or easier. So it would also maybe make sense to again be there at the same time. But of course now this is mostly dependent on the temperature, and the oven springs on, I assume, whenever the temperature hits a low, and then it springs on, and then it hits the 90 degrees or maybe even something above, such that the average temperature, I don't know basically if the sinus curve is going above the 90 degrees and such that the average is basically within the sinus curve, or if it's even a sinus curve, but I just assume for the sake of the argument now it is. So the sauna seems to be something that is standardized. I can compare myself against the previous versions of myself just by duration. I take a look on the watch and then I see. If I now want to maximize the benefit of sauna, what I also have experimented with is that I do quite intensive work before. But now the problem is, if on Sunday I do this, then all day long I didn't do anything. So what I began doing is sprinting to the gym as fast as I can, and then just changing, and then going into the sauna, which now has my system already kind of amped up, such that I pick up the system at a higher entry point, such that the sauna then basically drives my system higher and higher until I eventually get out and shower, and then I walk back. Sometimes I also run back in order to additionally have something that is cardiovascular load. What I also tried at least once is sprinting to the river, then swimming in the river for 10 minutes. So basically I try to also, in kind of the spirit of the triathlon, do kind of a couple of different things one after the other. Similarly to my sprint workout on Tuesday, where I, instead of running and then running again and then running again, and basically using the same muscular groups, I basically try to do different activities, such that I'm still targeting my heart, but I'm using basically other things, such that the individual muscle groups and also tendons and ligaments are not so much a constraint, but I'm more targeting the cardiovascular system. And this is also, to a certain extent, what sauna is doing. It's basically isolating the heart muscle. And this is not something you can do in any other form or shape without additionally targeting also the rest of your system. And so if I would need to describe to somebody else what the use of sauna would be, then I would say it's to have an additional cardiovascular load, or to replace otherwise non-existent cardiovascular loads, because one cannot further exercise. So if one already has an exercise regimen and this already is maxing out, then one can still add further cardiovascular load to it by adding sauna. Also, if one is injured now, one can still train the cardiovascular system, i.e. the heart, without now straining the bicep that is actually torn off. And so this is also something maybe that I should at least keep in mind for my future self. So mostly I'm targeting these videos as a note to my future self. At least that's kind of the frame I am thinking about. So as a summary, if one does sauna for the sake of exercise, I think then exercise is usually the better option. Instead of doing 20 minutes of sauna plus going there, in total it takes a duration of 1 hour, I just could do a second run in the week. And then I would have a second run, and the second run would be an additional 7, 5, 6 kilometers added to my running kilometers in a week. But this only works if I otherwise don't have my system kind of maxed out with the exercise I am doing, which is kind of the target anyway. Then there are also these other functions, but the problem is that you don't really have one function. With strength training, the function is, in my case, to increase or keep my muscle mass as well as increase strength. Of course, these are also 2 goals, and it's ideal to have just one goal, but of course there are always multiple goals. It's also a side effect of the strength training, or at least I try to design it in a way such that I also have a cardiovascular benefit. So what I do is supersets simultaneously with drop sets. I usually do 3 sets. I begin with the highest weight, and then on one exercise, and then I switch to the next exercise, which ideally now also is not constraining or targeting the same muscle group, such that I basically can switch without limiting the performance of the exercise itself. So the only thing that is kind of the overlap between those 2 exercises I switch in between is the cardiovascular system. And so I try to also hit the cardiovascular system to a certain extent with supersets, and the drop sets is just what has been working for me after I then warm up. Now, in the future, I think I will still keep sauna in some way. I actually recently began to experiment with seeing it more as a social workout, and maybe then preloading basically my cardiovascular system again with sprinting to the gym in the evening. It also depends on where I am working and how much activity I do in the rest of the day. But particularly on strength training days, I don't have much cardiovascular load. I only have the cardiovascular load from the strength training, apart from maybe riding the bike somewhere and so on and so forth. So if I then additionally run to the gym in the evening, and then I do sauna, and I might walk back, or I run back, then I just have some additional cardiovascular exercise, especially on the days in which I otherwise would only have the strength training. It seems to not make sense to train twice a day, at least over the course of the whole year. There were a couple of months in the beginning of the year where I trained in the morning, and I was quite consistent with morning training, and then I additionally did 10 or 20 minutes of core activity in the evening. This could be 10 minutes of swimming and running to the river and back. This could be 10 minutes of a run, or a short, or a 20-minute run, or something like this. Or I actually would sometimes do additional full workouts, but that's also then quite time intensive. And then I also would have to make sure that these would not counter the main workouts, which I still saw as the main workouts. And then eventually I ran into a bottleneck where these workouts began to constrain the main workout. So I sometimes was sore from the evening workout the day before, which not very useful. A summary. I don't think that, at least for me, this idea of, okay, I do a sauna session and then I do a cold plunge in between. I also don't have access to a cold plunge, or I shower cold and then I get into the sauna. It destroys the whole purpose of getting into the sauna. If I go there, then I do one session, I think, and I try to extend this. And if I get out, then that's it. There is no making up for basically the lost duration, because I was too weak to stay an additional minute in the sauna. Second of all, if I do multiple sessions of sauna, then there is the problem that the time begins to intensify. So maybe ideally I should return to trying to max out one session and to just stay in there, because that seems to be the most time effective thing, because you have the variable cost in terms of the sauna duration, and you have the fixed cost kind of going to the sauna and leaving again, which is given on any day, which I do. And so increasing the frequency in a given week just increases the fixed cost, whereas the variable cost, or in this case the return, because the duration in some sense is the return, is just not really increasing that much if one increases the frequency further. The most time effective idea would be to do it right after the workout, which many people also do. But if I want to work out in the morning, there is also, I think, no point to sit at a sauna in the morning or during the workday somewhere, because, well, it is just doing nothing. At the end of the day, it is just adding cardiovascular load, and one could go for a run, but that's kind of not the point of being alert in the morning. It also feels weird to me to be alert and to be in a sauna. So I need to be in a more H&N state in order to be in a sauna, such that I also can think about a few things. And in order to think about a few things, I also need to not feel guilty about basically the previous day. And the only way I can do this is if I already did something before. Mostly I also worked out before and also did other things I had planned for the day. So this means it should be the evening, it can be the morning. If I could switch to evening workouts again, but then I have the problem that I cannot sleep afterwards because then I need to eat and then I need to fast and then basically the night is over and I haven't slept, which is unfortunate. So the only way I could incorporate it in the future is still with an additional evening workout kind of, and in order to get more out of it, I would then again run to the gym, which I think makes sense. What I do in winter and also what I did last winter is that I additionally run basically in shorter clothes or in basically summer clothes to the gym, which then gives me additional cold exposure, which also allows me to extend the duration of the sauna. And I basically got rid of fasting during the day because I saw that it was kind of a side tangent optimization that basically did not allow me to then... Yeah, well, it was an optimization that for the sake of optimizing within the system I was setting up, it was useful, but in the more macro picture it was not useful.